May 1944. The Pacific Ocean was a deceptive expanse of blue. On the surface, the waves rolled gently under the tropical sun, stretching for thousands of miles in every direction. But beneath the waterline, a deadly game of chess was entering its endgame. The United States Navy was gathering its strength for a massive blow, Operation Forager, the invasion of the Mariana Islands. If the Americans could take Saipan and Guam, their B-29 bombers would be within range of Tokyo. The Empire of Japan knew this. They knew the Americans were coming, they just didn't know where. Admiral Suemu Toyota, the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, had a plan. He would not wait to be attacked. He would set a trap. In a secret operation room in Tokyo, Toyota drew a line on a map north of the Admiralty Islands. He designated it the NA line. It was an invisible wall of steel. To man it, he dispatched 7 of his most lethal submarines, the I-16 and 6 nimble Roe-class coastal submarines. Their orders were simple and chilling. Wait in silence, form a picket line across the likely American approach route, and when the massive U.S. carriers and troop transports sailed into the trap, unleash a torrent of torpedoes. It was a classic ambush. If it worked, thousands of American sailors and Marines would die before they even saw the beaches of Saipan. But the Americans had a weapon the Japanese didn't know about: code breakers. U.S. naval intelligence had intercepted the radio signals. They knew the submarines were moving into position. They knew the trap was set. But knowing the trap exists is one thing. Dismantling it is another. The job fell to a trio of small, unglamorous ships known as Destroyer Escorts. These weren't the mighty battleships or the famous aircraft carriers. They were the tin cans of the fleet, smaller, slower, and designed for one thing: protecting others. Leading this hunter-killer group was the USS England, DE-635. To the casual observer, the England was unremarkable. She was a Buckley-class destroyer escort, commissioned only months earlier. Her crew was young, mostly reservists, clerks, farmers, and mechanics who had never seen combat. Her captain, Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton, was a calm, soft-spoken officer who looked more like a university professor than a warrior. But the England carried a secret of her own. On her bow, she was fitted with the latest British-designed anti-submarine weapon, the Hedgehog. Unlike traditional depth charges, which were rolled off the back of the ship and exploded based on water pressure, the Hedgehog fired 24 mortar bombs ahead of the ship in a circular pattern. They would only explode if they hit metal. A hit meant instant destruction. A miss meant silence. On May 18, 1944, the England, flanked by her sister ships, the USS George and the USS Raby, steamed out of Purvis Bay. The mission was urgent. An American patrol plane had spotted a submarine's periscope slipping beneath the waves. The atmosphere on the bridge of the England was tense. The heat was suffocating. Every man on board knew the stakes. Somewhere ahead of them, in the crushing black depths, the elite crews of the Imperial Japanese Navy were waiting. They were listening for the hum of propellers. They were ready to fire. Pendleton stood on the wing of the bridge, scanning the horizon. He was sailing straight into the Japanese ambush. The invisible wall was directly ahead. The USS England was about to enter history. But at that moment, all they knew was that the hunter was about to become the hunted. The silence of the Pacific was about to be broken by the sound of sonar pings and the roar of exploding steel. The trap was sprung. The afternoon of May 19, 1944, began with the hypnotic monotony of patrol. The USS England, the USS George, and the USS Raby were cutting through the Solomon Sea, hunting for a ghost. At 1:25 p.m., the silence in the England's sound room was shattered. "Contact!" the sonarman shouted, pressing his headset tighter against his ears. "Range 2,000 yards, bearing 170. The ghost was real. Deep beneath the keel, the Japanese submarine I-16 was maneuvering. This was no coastal pest. I-16 was a massive, 350-foot-long fleet submarine, a veteran of the Pearl Harbor attack era. She was carrying supplies to starving Japanese troops on Bougainville. Her captain, Lieutenant Commander Yoshitaka Takeuchi, heard the ping of the American sonar and immediately ordered a crash dive, twisting his Leviathan violently to throw off the pursuit. On the bridge of the England, Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton remained eerily calm. He didn't shout. He simply ordered, "General quarters." The alarm klaxon screamed, and men rushed to their battle stations. This was the moment of truth for a weapon that many sailors still didn't trust, the Mark X Hedgehog. For years, the primary anti-submarine weapon had been the depth charge, essentially a large barrel of explosives rolled off the back of the ship. Depth charges were clumsy. They had to be set to explode at a specific depth, often based on a guess. When they exploded, they churned up the water so violently that the sonar went blind for 15 minutes, allowing the enemy to escape. The Hedgehog was different. Mounted on the bow of the England was a boxy launcher with 24 spigots. It looked like a crate of oversized beer bottles. When fired, it launched 24 mortar bombs in a high arch ahead of the ship. They would land in the water in a perfect elliptical circle, 200 yards in front of the bow. But the genius of the Hedgehog was its fuse. It was a contact weapon. It would sink silently through the water. If it missed the submarine, nothing happened. The sonar remained clear. But if just one of those 65-pound projectiles touched the metal hull of a submarine, it would detonate instantly, often triggering the other bombs and the submarine's own torpedoes. Pendleton guided the England in. The sonar operators tracked the I-16 as it swerved desperately. Fire! There was no thunderous boom. Instead, there was a strange rippling whack, whack, whack sound as the 24 mortar bombs were hurled into the air. They splashed into the sea ahead of the ship, disappearing into the blue. Then came the waiting, the Hedgehog time. For seconds that felt like hours, the crew stood on the deck, staring at the circle of disturbed water. The ship drifted forward. Silence. Suddenly, the ocean erupted. It wasn't a splash, it was a violent upheaval. A massive, dull roar shook the England from stem to stern. A dome of white water rose high into the air, followed by a terrifying, rumbling shockwave that felt like a sledgehammer hitting the hull. One Hedgehog had hit. The explosion had cracked the I-16 open. Seconds later, a second, much larger explosion tore through the depths. The submarine's internal warheads had detonated. The sea boiled. As the water settled, the England circled back. The blue water was now stained with a spreading slick of brown diesel oil. Debris began to bob to the surface, shattered cork insulation, pieces of wooden decking, and a sealed sack of rice marked with Japanese characters. There were no survivors. I-16 and her crew of 107 men were gone, crushed in an instant. On the bridge, the crew of the England looked at the Hedgehog launcher with new respect. It wasn't a toy, it was a hammer. They had drawn first blood, but they didn't know that the I-16 was just the sentry, the main line was waiting, and the killing had only just begun. The sinking of I-16 was not a fluke. It was the opening note of a symphony of destruction that naval historians would later analyze with disbelief. But for the crew of the USS England, there was no time for history books. There was only the heat, the sweat, and the relentless ping of the sonar. After destroying the I-16, Lieutenant Commander Pendleton realized exactly what he was facing. The Japanese hadn't just sent random patrols, they had established a rigid picket line. The enemy submarines were spaced out at specific intervals, waiting like tripwires for the American fleet. Pendleton looked at his charts. If his theory was correct, simply by sailing along this line, he would run right into the next submarine. He was right. On the morning of May 22, the radar operators picked up a blip. It was RO-106, a coastal submarine running on the surface to recharge its batteries. The England surged forward, her bow cutting through the waves. The Japanese sub, spotting the charging destroyer, crash-dived immediately. In the past, a submerged sub had the advantage. It could hide in the thermal layers of the water. But the crew of the England was no longer green. They were blooded. The sonar operators, their ears tuned to the specific frequency of death, locked onto the RO-106. Pendleton ordered the attack. Fire hedgehogs. Again, the ripple of mortar fire. Again, the agonizing weight. And then the ocean split open. A massive underwater explosion lifted the stern of the England. RO-106 was gone. The crew barely had time to celebrate. They were rolling up the Japanese line from south to north, systematically dismantling the trap. 24 hours later, on May 23, it happened again. This time, the target was RO-104. The Japanese captain tried every trick in the book. He went deep. He changed course violently. He tried to hide in the ship's wake. But the England was relentless. She stalked the sub like a wolf tracking a wounded deer. The coordination between the bridge and the Combat Information Center was telepathic. When the hedgehogs hit the water this time, the explosion was so violent that men on the deck of the England were knocked off their feet. Debris shot to the surface, shattered decking, oil and life jackets. RO-104 had been obliterated. By now, a strange atmosphere had taken over the ship. It was a mix of exhaustion and invincibility. The men were running on adrenaline and coffee. They slept at their battle stations. They ate sandwiches with one hand while holding shell casings with the other. They began to feel that they couldn't miss. Then came May 24. The England, along with the George and the Raby, detected a third contact, RO-116. The Japanese submarine commander must have heard the propellers of the American ships hunting him. He tried to run silent, deep and slow. It didn't work. The England sonar operator, a man who would later be called a magician by his captain, cut through the ocean noise. Contact, firm contact. At 02 hours, under the cover of darkness, the England made her run. The whack, whack, whack of the launchers sounded again. Seconds later, the dark sea turned white with foam. A massive underwater explosion lifted the stern of the England. RO-116 was gone. The other ships in the task group, the George and the Raby, watched in awe and a little bit of envy. Every time they established contact, the England seemed to swoop in and deliver the killing blow. "Damn it, Pendleton," the captain of the George signaled, half joking. "Save some for the rest of us." But there was no humor in the reality of what was happening. The USS England was achieving the impossible. In 72 hours, a single destroyer escort had wiped out half of a Japanese submarine squadron. The invisible wall that was supposed to protect the Japanese Empire was being smashed brick by brick. The crew was exhausted, dirty, and unshaven, but they were now the deadliest ASW team in the Pacific, and they weren't done yet. The hunt continued. By May 30, 1944, the crew of the USS England looked like ghosts. They hadn't slept properly in 10 days. Their uniforms were stiff with dried sweat and salt. They had already done the impossible. They had sunk 5 Japanese submarines in a single week. But the ocean had one last test for them, and this test had a name: RO-105. RO-105 was not like the others. Her commander, Lieutenant Rikinosuke Inoba, was a veteran. He was smart, he was aggressive, and he refused to die. The hunt began in the dark hours of the morning. The England, alongside her sister ships, the George and the Robbie, picked up the contact. It should have been routine. By now, the American sailors felt invincible. They moved in for the kill. But Inoba was waiting. As the American destroyers approached, he maneuvered his submarine with terrifying precision. He dove deep, far below the thermal layers that scrambled sonar. He released bubbles and debris to create knuckles in the water, phantom echoes that tricked the American operators into attacking empty ocean. For hours, the USS George and the USS Robbie pounded the water with depth charges. The sea boiled. Geysers of white water shot into the air, but every time the spray settled, the sonar ping returned. RO-105 was still there, moving, circling, mocking them. The hours dragged on. 10 hours, 20 hours. The sun rose, baked the steel decks, and set again. The standoff turned into an agonizing marathon. The American ships were running low on fuel. Their magazines were emptying. The crew of the England stood at their stations, fighting to keep their eyes open. The ping of the sonar became a rhythmic torture, drilling into their skulls. Down in the black depths, the situation inside RO-105 was horrific. The air was foul, the heat was unbearable, and the oxygen was running out. But Captain Inoba held his nerve. He knew the Americans couldn't stay forever. He was right. After 30 hours of continuous hunting, the situation became critical. The task group commander received a radio message from headquarters. They were dangerously low on supplies. The order was given: abandon search, return to base. The captains of the George and the Robbie were furious, but orders were orders. They began to turn away. RO-105 had won. But on the bridge of the England, Lieutenant Commander Pendleton hesitated. He looked at his sonar man. The signal was still there. It was faint, but it was there. "Give me one more run," Pendleton radioed the commander. "Just one." The permission was granted. This was it, the final bullet in the chamber. The England turned. She had very few hedgehogs left in her launchers. She moved into position, plotting a course that would intersect with the exhausted Japanese submarine. Inoba, sensing the other ships leaving, likely thought he had survived. He might have started to ascend, or perhaps he just made a small course correction. It was a fatal mistake. The sonar operator on the England, tuned into the movements of the enemy like a pianist to a melody, called out the final adjustments. Fire! The last volley of hedgehogs arched into the twilight sky. They splashed into the water in their deadly circle. For 15 seconds, there was silence. The crew of the England held their breath, clutching the railings. Had they missed? Was Inoba going to slip away after 30 hours of hell? And then the ocean cracked. A massive, violent explosion rocked the England harder than any before. It was followed by a deep, rumbling roar that seemed to go on forever. A huge oil slick, far larger than the previous ones, rose to the surface, bringing with it the shattered remains of RO-105. The duel was over. The 30-hour nightmare had ended in a split second of violence. The crew of the England didn't cheer. They were too tired.
They simply slumped against the bulkheads, staring at the dark water. They had done what no ship in the history of naval warfare had ever done. They had sunk 6 submarines in 12 days. They had broken the line. But as they turned the ship toward home, leaving the grave of RO-105 behind them, they knew they had just survived the longest day of their lives.
The silence that followed the destruction of RO-105 was different from the silence of the hunt. It wasn't the tense, holding your breath silence of men waiting for a sonar ping. It was the heavy, exhausted silence of victory. On the morning of May 31st, 1944, the USS England turned her bow south. She was a battered ship. Her paint was peeling, her decks were stained with oil and salt, and her magazines were almost empty. She was running on fumes. In the galley, the cooks were scraping the bottom of the barrels. The crew had eaten almost all the fresh food during the marathon hunt. But as they steamed back toward the fleet anchorage at Purvis Bay, the crew of the England began to realize what they had done. They hadn't just won a battle, they had rewritten the rules of naval warfare. In 12 days, a single destroyer escort, a tin can designed for convoy duty, had wiped out an entire Japanese submarine squadron. 6 submarines, 6 crews, over 400 enemy sailors lost to the crushing pressure of the deep. It was a feat that had never been accomplished before in the history of the U.S. Navy, and it has never been matched since. The strategic impact was immediate and devastating. In Tokyo, the Naval High Command was in a state of confusion. Admiral Toyoda's Na line, the trap set to ambush the American invasion fleet, had simply ceased to exist. He waited for reports from his submarines. He waited for news of American carriers sinking, but the radio waves remained static. The destruction of the 6 submarines had blinded the Japanese Empire. When the massive American invasion force set sail for the Mariana Islands, for Saipan and Guam, there were no scouts left to warn Tokyo. The England had punched a hole in the Japanese defensive line so wide that an entire fleet sailed through it undetected. When the USS England finally limped into the harbor, she didn't look like a legend, she looked like a wreck. But word had spread. As she passed the massive battleships and carriers, crews lined the rails to cheer. They knew that the England had cleared the path for them. The accolades followed quickly. The ship was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, the highest honor a U.S. vessel can receive. Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton, the quiet, professor-like captain, was awarded the Navy Cross. But the greatest tribute came from the highest level of command. Admiral Ernest King, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. fleet, was so astounded by the report that he made a promise. He declared, "There'll always be an England in the U.S. Navy." He pledged that as long as the Navy existed, there would be a ship bearing that name to honor the 12 days in May when a single ship fought a war against the deep and won. However, the story of the England has a bittersweet ending. The ship that was the hunter eventually became the prey. Just a year later, off Okinawa, the England was struck by a Japanese kamikaze pilot. The explosion killed 37 of her crew, men who had survived the submarine hunt. The ship didn't sink, but she was so badly damaged that she was never fully repaired. She was towed home and sold for scrap after the war. Yet the steel was just a vessel. The legend was the crew. In the final analysis, the miracle of the England wasn't about the Hedgehog mortars or the sonar technology. It was about the endurance of ordinary men. It was about the sonar operators who listened to the ocean for 30 hours straight until their ears bled. It was about the depth charge crews who loaded heavy explosives until their muscles failed. They had turned the tide of the Pacific War not with a massive fleet battle, but in the lonely, terrifying cat-and-mouse game of the open ocean.
They proved that in modern warfare, a small ship with a brave heart could be deadlier than a battleship. The Nah line was broken,